Ice Rink Cave Nightmare. On May 25, 2003, Chris Molyneux prepared for a simple family cave trip under a clear sky. At 36, he trusted his experience exploring Washington's lava tubes to keep them safe. He had pre-programmed his GPS, packed light gear, and memorized the cave layout from an online forum. Their minivan rattled up a Forest Service road toward the isolated entrance. Chris parked near a faint trail and led his wife and 3 children into the pine woods. They reached a sinkhole opening, a dark scar in the earth, colder than the surrounding air. Chris hesitated, uncertain if it matched the map, but decided it was close enough. He strapped on his helmet, clicked on his headlamp, slipped the car keys into his pocket, and told Michelle he would scout ahead. The cave swallowed him quickly, the temperature dropping with every step. Roughly 100 feet in, he encountered a dead end with only a tight crawl space to the right. Comparing it to the map under his headlamp, Chris decided this was the correct path. He dropped to his knees, pushed his fanny pack ahead, and crawled through the narrow opening. Emerging into a larger passage, he turned left, trusting it would lead to the main chamber. The passage stretched longer than expected, uneven and silent except for his boots scraping rock. Eventually, he reached a collapsed section of ceiling, unfamiliar and not indicated on his map. Picking his way through loose boulders, Chris pushed forward, assuming he was close to the main entrance. Instead, he found another collapse, a dirt and stone plug blocking any sign of daylight. A heavy chill set in his chest as he realized the entrance was gone. Checking his watch, Chris saw he had been underground much longer than planned. He turned around, trying to backtrack toward the original crawlway. After walking for several minutes, he found another identical collapse, sealing him off again. To test the passage, Chris scratched an X into the dirt at his feet. 400 paces later, he returned to the same X, completing a full circle without realizing it. Sweat chilled against his skin as he understood he was trapped in a looping passage. He moved systematically along the walls, searching for any hidden crawlway or opening. Each footstep scraped dust from the walls, his gloved hands feeling only unbroken stone. The weight of the car keys in his pocket reminded him that his family was stranded without him. Time passed without meaning, broken only by the dwindling strength of his headlamp. Chris tore pieces of his cave map and dropped them at landmarks, trying to prevent walking in circles. He completed another full circuit, ending back where he started, no closer to escape. His breathing turned fast and shallow, echoing unnaturally in the tight space. The air grew thick, tasting metallic, every breath scraping against the dryness of his throat. 5 hours underground blurred his sense of direction until the cave walls became meaningless repetitions. The ground beneath him tilted in his perception, rocks seeming to shift with every labored step. Muscles in his legs cramped as he forced himself to keep moving around the endless loop. The headlamp flickered slightly, sending bolts of panic through his exhausted mind. Calling out only fed the silence, the cave swallowing sound without mercy. At one point, he fell to his knees, too dizzy to stay upright, the cold seeping into his bones. He dug weakly at the dirt floor with his fingers, trying to find anything he had missed. Pain bloomed in his knees and palms, raw from constant crawling and scraping against stone. Chris forced himself upright again, staggering back toward the original collapse plug. Staying low to the ground, he ran his hands carefully along the base of the wall. A slight shadow break caught his eye, hidden beneath a jut of rock. He crouched lower, sweeping his headlamp beam until he found a barely visible crawlway. He dropped flat and squeezed into the opening, scraping his elbows raw against the tight stone. After an agonizing push, he recognized the original entrance passage ahead. Chris stumbled out into the burning brightness of late afternoon, blinking blindly at the sun. Boy Scout Nightmare. On December 27, 2003, 8 boys from the San Antonio Boy Village and 2 counselors headed toward Boy Scout Cave in Florida. Among the boys were 15-year-old Michael Shiro and 16-year-old Javik Henderson, both eager for adventure. The counselors, citing their size, chose to remain outside the cave, unaware of the dangers ahead. Boy Scout Cave was infamous for its dry, tight, twisting passages, yet was considered stable and safe. The boys entered just after noon with only 9 flashlights between them. As they moved deeper, the temperature settled at a cool 72 degrees Fahrenheit and the silence thickened around them. One counselor lit a small fire near the entrance to stay warm, unaware it could endanger the boys inside. Michael and Henderson led the group confidently into the depths, navigating narrow turns with growing tension. Claustrophobia began to weigh on them as the cave's darkness pressed from all directions. An hour in, the group reached a difficult section ominously known as the hairpin curve. Without adult guidance, the boys hesitated. Then, Michael chose to push ahead alone. The hairpin curve was a tight, sharp bend in the cave, barely passable by a single body. Michael wriggled through the curve, scraping his body on the jagged limestone walls. Henderson followed, twisting his body painfully to navigate the brutal angle. Midway through, Henderson became hopelessly stuck, unable to move forward or back. His breathing quickened as sharp rocks pressed into his ribs, the walls unrelenting and cold. Michael noticed his friend's struggle and crawled back, wedging himself into the jagged slit. The confined space turned violent, skin scraped, limbs cramped, and panic rising. Henderson cried out in pain as Michael desperately pushed and pulled, trying to free him. Their energy drained drained quickly in the cramped, unmoving position against the frigid limestone. Michael's vision blurred and muscles weakened until he collapsed, unconscious in the tight passage. Trapped and alone, Henderson screamed for help, his voice bouncing hollowly through the rock. Back in the wider tunnel, the rest of the boys panicked as their flashlights began to flicker. Fear spread that the counselor's fire was depleting their oxygen, feeding hysteria. Realizing they couldn't help, the boys made the wrenching decision to leave their friends behind. They crawled frantically toward the surface, the weight of guilt and fear pressing harder than the cave. Outside, the counselors were caught off guard by the breathless, tear-streaked boys. One counselor doused the fire in horror, while the other called emergency services immediately. Within an hour, experienced cave rescue teams arrived at the darkened entrance. The rescuers prepared carefully, knowing Boy Scout Cave's bottlenecks would make the operation grueling. Inside, they found the remaining boys huddled, terrified, convinced they had nearly suffocated. Tests revealed the air was safe. The suffocation had been psychological, panic-induced, but Henderson and Michael were still deep in the cave, alone and rapidly deteriorating. Equipped with chisels, harnesses, and grit, rescuers began crawling through the narrow labyrinth. At the hairpin curve, they found Henderson conscious but fading, his voice weak and body trembling. Michael lay slumped ahead of him, cold and unresponsive, his breath shallow. The rescuers prioritized Henderson, chiseling slowly to widen the slit trapping him. Every strike echoed like a heartbeat through the rock, urgency mounting with each delay. After over an hour, Henderson was freed, crying, frozen, but alive. Wrapped in a thermal blanket, he was carefully maneuvered out of the cave by exhausted rescuers. Michael's condition was worse, and every minute meant less chance of survival. Rescuers worked with frenzied care, carving space and hauling his body with trembling hands. 2 hours after reaching him, they finally pulled Michael free, his skin ice cold, pulse barely present. Emergency medics were waiting at the surface as the boys were lifted from the cave's mouth. Both were rushed to the hospital, suffering from severe hypothermia and exhaustion. Michael remained unconscious for nearly 24 hours, suspended between life and death. In the aftermath, it was clear that a lack of planning, gear, and adult presence nearly ended in tragedy. Boy Scout Cave was silent once more, but its narrow throat would forever echo with the screams of that day. Keyhole Cave Nightmare. On the morning of July 18, 1998, Craig Douglas, his sister Jessica, and friends Buster Miller and Jennifer Russell arrived at the entrance of Keyhole Cave C. The cave sat in a wooded area, quiet and undisturbed, a familiar location from a previous trip where they'd turned back early. Their goal this time was to reach the bottom, 113 feet below the surface. Keyhole Cave is 370 feet long and known for tight, twisting, and low-ceilinged passages that require crawling and squeezing. At the very end is Paul's Pipe, a 1-foot-high crawl leading to an 8-foot vertical pit. The group prepared their gear, helmets, knee pads, headlamps, and entered the cave. Inside, the air cooled, sound dulled, and the environment narrowed to rock, darkness, and silence. For several hours, they made consistent progress through narrow, irregular tunnels. Physical effort increased as they contorted through body-width passages that scraped skin and taxed muscles. At the entrance to Paul's Pipe, they paused, aware it was the tightest section ahead. Craig took the lead, flattening himself and crawling forward through the 1-foot-high tube. The stone pressed into his ribs, shoulders, and hips as he advanced using only his legs. Reaching the lip of the pit, he extended his legs downward, searching for the edge with his boots. His left foot caught between rocks, pinched and immobile. As he shifted to free it, his right knee jammed between 2 slabs of bedrock. A sudden sharp pressure locked his knee, immediate, intense, and unrelenting. He tried to reverse or slide forward, but any movement increased the compression on the joint. Craig's upper body was angled downward toward the pit, supported only by his trapped leg. He began to sweat and breathe harder as each attempt worsened the pain and deepened his entrapment. Jessica called out from behind, realizing something was wrong when he stopped responding clearly. Buster tried to reach him but could only get close enough to see the limited space and Craig's compromised position. They attempted to twist Craig's torso and reposition his leg, but there was no room for leverage. His leg became increasingly swollen, pressure building against the trapped knee and cutting off circulation. Craig adjusted his torso just enough to avoid sliding completely into the pit. Jennifer was sent back through the cave to call for help, while Jessica and Buster stayed to support Craig. To stop his body from slumping further, they wedged clothing beneath him as makeshift padding. The first rescuers arrived after 5 hours and crawled into position to assess his condition. They noted visible swelling, limited movement, and restricted blood flow to the leg. Multiple rescue attempts were made using pulling, repositioning, and lubricants like water and vegetable oil. None of the attempts reduced the compression on Craig's knee. As time passed, the cold stone beneath him began to sap his body heat. His shivering increased, and signs of early hypothermia began to appear. Rescuers wrapped him in a space blanket and used a heat gun powered by an electric line run from the surface. The cold was temporarily stabilized, stabilized, but oxygen levels began to drop. At 16.9% oxygen, breathing became more difficult for both Craig and the rescue workers. A ventilation system was constructed, pumping fresh air through hoses into the confined space. With oxygen stabilized, focus returned to freeing Craig's leg. By now, more than 30 hours had passed since he became trapped. Circulation was nearly gone in the leg, and sensation had diminished into constant, severe throbbing. Rescue teams considered breaking the leg as a last resort, but opted instead to chisel the surrounding rock. Air chisels and hand drills were used to remove material from around the jammed knee. Only one person could work at a time due to the confined space of Paul's pipe. Drilling continued in shifts, reducing the rock in millimeter increments. Craig's body temperature dropped again, and his physical responses slowed. He could no longer speak and required constant prompting to remain conscious. After enough rock had been removed, rescuers passed the drill to Craig for the final section they couldn't reach. With limited strength and mobility, Craig managed to apply the drill to the remaining obstruction. His body shook with effort as vibrations shot through his arms, spine, and skull. Eventually, the rock shifted, and with one last pull, his leg came free. It was 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, over 30 hours after he became trapped. The leg was severely damaged, discolored, and unable to bear weight. The team supported Craig as he began the long crawl out, inching his way through the same passages. Extraction took over 8 hours due to Craig's condition and the cave's structure. At 9:15 a.m. on Monday, he emerged at the surface after 43 hours underground. He was transported immediately to a hospital where emergency surgery was performed on his leg. Recovery would take months with lasting damage, but his life was preserved. The rock had held him for nearly 2 days and only let go after every possible option had been exhausted.